evening, everyone. How are you? Good? Good. Welcome to tonight's forum on homelessness in Austin. My name is Angela Evans. I'm the Dean of the Lyndon Baines Johnson School of Public Affairs here at the University of Texas. Government works best when we, the citizens, engage. We all have a role and responsibility in sharing the community in which we live. And that is why we are here. This is all about civic vigilance. This is a critical time for our city, and so many of our leaders, including the panelists who are here with us tonight, they're working to address the issue of how to help those who are experiencing homelessness while at the same time working to make our city safe, clean, and welcoming for all. Cities are where public, private, and nonprofit sectors must come together to shape public policies and strategies that build inclusive, prosperous communities. Austin is no different. While our city has emerged as a leading hub for innovation, we also grapple with the challenges of affordability, economic segregation, and inequality. The challenges we face with homelessness are very complicated. They produce tensions among us and reflect a broad range of concerns. Solutions that will appease all concerns are not obvious. Solutions that will mitigate this public policy problem are not straightforward. And a very important challenge is addressing the effects of those experiencing homelessness is that the circumstances under which individuals become homeless vary greatly. Thus, different approaches must apply to different constituencies. One size, one approach, one attempt does not fit all. We at the LBJ School are co-sponsoring this mayoral forum with the LBJ Foundation because we believe fundamentally in the power of dialogue, the need to work together, and the promise of an engaged citizenry. During this forum, we will tackle community-wide solutions to homelessness and its many drivers with panelists with various backgrounds, various opinions, various levels of experience. And they're across the public, the private, and the nonprofit sectors. There will also be several opportunities for our audience to submit questions for our panel. So we have some submissions and we're going to get we'll collect others as well. I want to thank our panel, Mayor Adler, Chief Manley, Bill Bryce, Chris Harris, Susan McDowell, Matthew Malika, and Sherry Greenberg for being here with us tonight. I also want to acknowledge some audience members who are here tonight with us as well. Former Austin Mayor Frank Cooksey and his wife Lynn, Council members Togo, Ellis, Kazar, Alter, Poole, Kitchen, and Madison. This is a very important topic, obviously, from not only you can look out from this as a full group of people here, but the people who have decided to come and listen as well. I would like to especially thank tonight's moderator, our own Stephen Pedigo. Stephen is the inaugural director of the LBJ School's Urban Lab. We call it a do tank rather than a think tank. That's going to inform urban policy and create strategies for Texas cities and beyond. And most of all, I want to thank you for taking time from your busy lives and many demands on your time to come and be with us tonight. So please join me in welcoming Stephen and our panelists. Thank you so much.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you, Dean Evans, for that warm introduction. And thank you all for coming to this important discussion tonight. I'm really proud to live in a city where nearly 1,000 people come out on a Thursday night to talk about an important issue affecting our city. Not to mention, many of you have sent me many emails about this as well. So it is great to live in an engaged city. We're fortunate tonight to be at the LBJ Auditorium. I'm reminded by President Johnson's remarks in 1965, actually, when he founded the Department of Housing and Urban Development, when he said, "America must make every family live in a home of dignity, a neighborhood of pride, a community of opportunity, and a city of promise and hope." So that's why we're all here tonight. That's why the LBJ School cares about this issue. It's why we've provided a platform for you to have a fact-driven conversation about the issues affecting our community. So here's how we'll spend our time. My goal is to move us beyond the status quo conversation about the ordinance. Many forums have addressed this. First, I plan to talk about long-term policies impacting homelessness here in Austin. Why do we care about this issue? What are the factors that have led us to where we are today? How can we ensure the safety of our communities, and also for those experiencing homelessness as well? What's our plan for housing? How do we bridge the gap between a housing first policy? How do we address the issues, the health issues of our community? And how do we improve cross-sector collaboration? Second, I'll get to a near-term action plan. What's needed and who's on tap? And finally, for the last hour of the conversation, we'll turn to you. My colleague Vicki DiFrancesco Soto is joining us here to provide us some assistance in gathering your questions. Now, as I tell my students, here are the groundwork rules for our classroom. Our panelists will not give speeches or prepared remarks. I'll ask that the responses are short. And I just moved from New York City, and I promise you I know how to interrupt and assert myself. I'm asking them to provide specific examples, best practices about what we can learn from other cities. And not every panelist will answer every question. I will ask that you as our audience members submit your questions on a note card and pass them to our LBJ team that's in the aisles. We're approaching the Q&A portion of tonight's conversation that way because it frankly allows us to get to more of your questions. It allows us to group similar questions together. You can also join tonight's conversation via social media using our hashtag #ATXHomelessForum. And finally, this is really important. Our conversation will be respectful of diverse viewpoints. Let's work from the place that we all deeply care about our community. As the great urbanist James Jacobs said, it is the mixing and mingling of different people that make our communities great. So now on to our panels. We're joined tonight by Austin Mayor Steve Adler, Austin Police Chief Brian Manley, Bill Price, who's the Vice President of the Downtown Austin Alliance, a private sector organization that promotes and advocates for the downtown, my colleague Sherry Greenberg, who's also the Board of Managers for Central Health, Chris Harris, a community advocate with Homes Not Handcuffs, Susan McDowell, the CEO of LifeWorks, a nonprofit focused on ending youth homelessness, and Matt Malika, Executive Director of Ending Community Homeless Coalition, or ECHO, as you'll hear tonight, one of the key organizations in our community that delivers services to those experiencing homeless. Now please join me in welcoming our panel. So as I tell my students, one of the things that I really believe is that public policy conversations should be founded in fact. And so here's the facts as we know them. There are about 553,000 people across the United States that experience homelessness. That's from 2018. Now, to give you perspective, that is larger than the city of the population of Atlanta and Miami. African Americans represent 60% of this population. Here in Austin, ECHO found that in 2019, on a one-night count, there were 2,255 people experiencing homelessness. 52% of them were sheltered, 48% of them were unsheltered. That number is up about 4 or 5% depending on how you do the calculation, but it's on average, it's on par with the national average and well below communities like Los Angeles that saw the homeless population spike over 16% in 1 year. That said, as you'll hear tonight, we all acknowledge that we need better data. We need better research to really put our hands around this issue. There's a perception that we're not seeing results around homelessness. However, as a community, we've seen about a 25% reduction in youth homelessness. That's adults from 18 to 24 that are experiencing these issues. But on the flip side, we know this. We know that since the change in the ordinance, the perception around this issue is up. We're seeing more tents. We're reading more articles. We're watching more television news about this. We're attending more programs, and we're participating in more forums. This is a critical issue for us as a community to wrap our hands around. So I'm just going to start with a very open question for our panelists, and that is, do any of you on the forum believe that public camping is a long-term solution to homelessness? Now, I ask that question because there's a myth around town. There's a myth around town that public camping is a solution for figuring out this issue. And as you'll hear tonight, as we'll walk through this is not the case. So Bill, let's start with you. You're a representative of the Downtown Business Alliance. You represent stakeholders, retailers, groceries, places I like to frequent for cold beverages, perhaps. Why is this a priority for your stakeholders? Why do you guys care about this issue?
Thanks, Stephen, and thanks for hosting. Good evening, everybody. This issue is critically important to Downtown Austin Alliance. Our mission is to build value and vitality and to make Downtown Austin a great place. But we're at the epicenter of the problem of homelessness. If you look at the data that's collected by ECHO through the annual point-in-time counts, Downtown Austin has about 1/3 of all of the people experiencing homelessness in Austin and Travis County within its boundaries. This is an extremely important problem. It's a top priority, strategic priority of Downtown Austin Alliance. It's a top strategic priority of the City of Austin to address. But first and foremost, it's about people. It's about our community members, people who are fathers, mothers, brothers, sisters, friends, and family members. And we've got to see that we do better for the people who are our community members to make better for them rather than having them experiencing homelessness. We don't think that it's right for people to have to camp. We need to provide better than that. Let's create options, adequate shelter and housing that provide options so people don't have to camp out on the sidewalks.
So Chris, you're a community advocate. You work directly with homeless. Why do you care about this issue?
Because homelessness shouldn't exist. Because it's a form of extreme poverty that should not happen in the richest country in the history of human civilization. And I believe that we have a duty, we have a responsibility as a city and as fellow citizens to make sure that everyone is housed and has what they need ultimately to get by day to day.
So Mr. Mayor, the City Council has said that this is an absolute #1 priority for the city. Why is this a priority for the city?
It's a priority for the city for lots of reasons on many different levels. I think ultimately any society is judged by how it treats and respects and supports the least fortunate among them. I think that's true. It's important because it affects the quality of life. Certainly the people that are experiencing homelessness, for everyone in our city, in addition to what it says about who we are. It's important because this is a challenge that we can actually do something about, that we can actually solve. We talked about 2,255 people on our streets on a given night that are experiencing homelessness. In a city of 1 million people, in a region of 2 million people, that is a number that we should be able to do something about. And what we know for sure is that if we don't do something about it now, it is a challenge that will grow. We only have to look at other cities to see what happens if we don't actually deal with this.
So I think it's important for us just to recap what we just heard. So we've asked the same question of 3 different various stakeholders amongst our panel. Business community, someone that represents our community in terms of advocacy, and someone that's our chief sort of elected official. This is a priority for all of our community. We may not agree on the solutions, right? But there is a consensus that this is an issue that we have to figure out. So Matt, you are new to Austin, but an expert in the space in terms of working directly with homeless issues. So what do you know tell us a little bit about what are the factors that really contribute to homelessness as we think about this issue?
Sure, so as we talked about earlier a little bit, this is a very complicated and nuanced issue. There are so many different factors that converge and so many individual reasons that people in our community are experiencing homelessness. I think there's the easy stuff to talk about, right? Housing costs are up, wages are pretty stagnant, therefore, housing affordability is out of reach for people. Some people will have healthcare emergencies and large medical bills that cause them to fall into homelessness to their families. But I think there's also some of the more difficult discussion to have is to look at how, this is a social construct. It's been constructed through many years of regulation and systemic issues that occur throughout our country. I think race and socioeconomic status plays a big part in homelessness, and we'll talk about some of the data that suggests, African American, the black population is homeless at a rate that's much higher in controlling for poverty than our white folks experiencing homelessness and poverty. So I think it's really just a really complicated factor to deconstruct, but we need to look at it from a systemic perspective and keep an eye on that.
So Susan, same factors that affect youth homelessness, or is it a bit different, or would you point to some of the same characteristics perhaps?
Absolutely the same characteristics with a little specificity around something we know with data with youth homelessness in Austin, Texas, is that 76% of youth 24 and below who experience homelessness have been in foster care, juvenile justice, or both. So when you look at the real driving causes of youth homelessness, you need to look at systems involvement, why youth get involved in systems, and also the racial disproportionality within systems, and address those fundamental issues.
So Sherry, you sit on the board of Central Health. From your perspective, what role can our public health agencies do to help us better identify these challenges around the factors which are driving people into homelessness?
One of the things we have to look at is the social determinants, right? And what causes homelessness, as we have talked about. And certainly we know that in this country, many people are in a precarious position. They're just one incident away from being homeless. And for some people, this can be an issue with mental health or substance abuse or behavioral health. But for other people, they are just one incident away as far as a medical emergency from ending up homeless, right? Because the bills stack up. And at Central Health, there is a broader definition that we use of homelessness. We look at the count, but people also self-identify, and we also look at people who you may say are couch surfing, right? They are not on the street, but they don't have a home. So we see about 10,000 people a year who in some way we identify or they have identified in that larger definition of homeless. And a big issue is they get medical care, but then they have a couple of chronic conditions and then they go straight back out on the street. So there's an issue, and we're certainly looking at this and others, of providing more respite care, of providing places for them to go where they can get well or get stable.
So Bill, one of the things I did prior to this is I talked to all these great panelists about their expertise in the area. I'm not a homeless expert by any means, so Bill and I talked to all of the panelists, and Bill, we talked on Friday. One of the things that struck me about our conversation was the idea that you said we spend so much time thinking about how to solve the effects of homelessness, and not enough time thinking about how to identify what's causing people in homelessness. Tell us more about that. That was a really interesting perspective.
Well, I think that it's important to understand that point, and that I believe that 90% or more of our resources are dedicated to trying to solve for or manage the problem that we see on the streets, under the bridges, in the parks every single day, not just downtown, but citywide. And so often I hear the question as do all of us, how do we solve homelessness? And I believe that the answer to that is to prevent it. If you can't slow down or stop the pipeline of inflow of people coming into a condition of homelessness, then we will be on an endless treadmill, I believe. So the critical factor is what's the right balance between how we effectively manage the problem that's on the street and solve for the condition those folks are experiencing today, while we also dedicate sufficient resources to slow the pipeline. And I think there are several key upstream factors. Certainly the criminal justice system feeds people into a condition of homelessness. Certainly the behavioral health system, having ASH in our community that serves 39 counties. When someone comes to ASH from someone else and is deemed to be stable where they can be released, Austin State Hospital, thank you, mental health facility that serves 39 counties from within Central Texas and mostly East. When somebody is stabilized, they can leave Ash and decide to stay here. There's not step-down care back in their communities. There's not care within their communities that might prevent them from coming here in the first place. And there are economic factors, among others that were mentioned by the group, people falling into the condition because of medical bills, loss of a job, a catastrophe, or ailment.
So Susan, you're shaking your head. Anything to add?
Right.
Or did you do a good job?
No, great job, but just to take it a little more completely to solutions. I think it's helpful to remind ourselves of the success that we had a few years ago and continue to have with veterans homelessness. And that was part of a federal framework for dramatically reducing both the inflow and the existence of homelessness that was coordinated, data-driven, and involved many, many partners across the community. And this is what we have going on now with youth homelessness. It is a data-driven, coordinated, multi-agency and multi-system approach to not just housing youth who are experiencing homelessness, but to Bill's point, working upstream with the systems that are most likely to identify and in some cases unintentionally drive youth homelessness, like foster care, juvenile justice, youth who identify through the school district. So we can work to establish housing and diversion activities and support for families, or even kind of less intensive and less expensive interventions and services, so we don't have to provide a housing solution, and we can prevent the trauma of literal homelessness.
So I wanted to shift the conversation to public safety. Chief, thanks for joining us tonight for this conversation. So how has the APD's role changed as the ordinance passed this summer?
So in particular, the role that I guess probably the biggest change is what we have the authority to do under the changed ordinances. So, and it's educating both the business community, the residents, with the changes in the ordinance, that things that we would have been called to in the past, whether it be someone sitting in line in front of a business, camping in front of a business, or some of the related item, that if we cannot establish the new threshold of hazardous, dangerous, or obstructing, that it is not a violation of the ordinance as it used to be, and making sure that the community understands that. And then, again, the officers maintaining that role that we have in the community, not only just through the host team, but through every officer that's out there, and really trying to help those that find themselves in a condition of homelessness and realize that the police are not just a source of enforcement, but also a resource as everyone else on this panel is.
So I'm going to put you on the hot spot. There is a perception that crime from homelessness is up. It's in every email that I read about this forum. Is that true?
I have no data to show that violent crime has increased based on the changes in the ordinance. I think what we all recognize here is it's much more visible. The homeless community is much more visible. Men and women that used to live out in the woods and maybe more secluded and out of sight are, I think, to a greater extent in the public's eye. I think areas where there have always been camps, the camps are much larger and much more elaborate. And I think that camping is also taking place in areas where it didn't before.
What about nonviolent crime?
Are we responding to the audience?
We're not responding to the audience. If you will write that question for us, we are taking questions from the audience. If you will write that question on a note card and pass it up, I'm happy to ask that question in the public forum.
But Steve, if I may, just to add, not only to hang, we don't see an increase in crime right now. What we see.
When are the note cards going to be passed out?
We should. You can get them at the registration. I think you can get them at the registration table. We'll have some of our folks walk down with them as well as they're passing, as they're going through. So, Mayor, you wanted to make a point about that.
I just want to pause for a second to really discuss and to make sure that we know what it was that happened in June. It was really important for the city council not to do anything that limited the police and our law enforcement ability to be able to respond to anything that a police officer thought was a public safety risk. To be able to arrest people, to be able to ticket people, to be able to pursue public safety risks as they have always done. Same thing for public health hazards. The laws we have with respect to public health hazards have been maintained in full force. I hear a meme and I see the same social media that other people see with the suggestion that somehow or another police are their hands are tied with respect to being able to pursue and act upon public safety risks and public health hazards, crimes in our community in any way, and that is simply not true. And when I asked the police chief if his officers are actually telling that to people, that their hands are tied to be able to pursue crimes, he tells me that that's not true, and I believe him. And I don't believe that our police officers are actually on the streets saying that.
Sure.
And if they are, then I would like to know, the chief would like to know, because it is really important that the police have every right and ability to be able to enforce our criminal laws, and we've done nothing.
So Chief, I want to go back to the point that you made earlier, and that was about data. You said we don't really know, we don't have the data. How can we improve the data around this where we can really have a point of time to look at this and get our hands really around it? Thoughts on that?
So I think there's data and there's anecdotal data.
Yeah.
With the data, what we're doing as a department is we're trying to collect what we can. Officers that get dispatched to call for service, whether it be sitting line, camping, whatever business residence, the officers are making notations if they were unable to take an action in that incident, but would have been under the prior ordinance. We're trying to collect that data so we can measure the impact of the change. But we also understand that that business owner or that resident that calls once or twice or 3 times to report someone who's sitting or lying or camping and is informed each of those times that it does not meet the hazard threshold, the danger threshold, they may no longer call when prior to the change they may have called. So we're doing what we can do to collect the data, but we just have to make sure we understand that the data is not going to tell the complete story. The other that we have is just anecdotal data, the information we get from officers on what they're seeing and experiencing, and then what we hear from community members as well as what they're hearing and experiencing.
So Matt, you have a point?
Yeah, Steve, I just want to make sure when we're talking about data too, I don't want to just connect homelessness to data on crime,
For sure.
and I think it's really important to also look at, we're trying to gather data early on, after these ordinances were passed, like, are people connecting to their primary care more? Are we seeing folks working into the housing resources on a larger scale? Are we getting a better understanding of homelessness in our community because we are able to outreach folks that before we weren't able to find? I mean, this is a really important point to recognize that people are getting the care they need, but before they weren't, and I think that's a really important thing that we address here.
That's a great point. So I just want to encourage you that if you have questions, feel free to, again, write those on the note cards. We're taking them. I see Vicki is absolutely working to pull those questions together for us. I want to move the conversation to housing. So Mayor, in your recent statement op-ed, you wrote, if we want to help people, and we want people to stop sleeping in public spaces, we have to house them. That's a housing first approach. Describe what you did by that. Describe what a housing first approach is for folks that maybe aren't familiar with that terminology.
I think it recognizes that someone who is experiencing homelessness, in order to be able to be safe and stabilize their lives, in order to be able to get back in the flow of the community, requires oftentimes just getting back into a place to be. A lot of the people that are experiencing homelessness are transitionally in that position. Is the perfect storm. They lost their wife and their children and their job, and they had a medical bill, and then they lost their apartment all at the same time. And if you can just get them into a home for just a month or 2 or 3, many of those folks will get back. Some people need more than that. Some people need services. They need mental health services, or they need other support to get a job, or they need something else. But what all the studies show is that somebody can better take those services and benefit from those services if they're in a home. Imagine trying to apply for a job or to get an apartment. You have the application and you put in your name, and the second blank says, "Tell me where you live, what's your address," and you can't even fill that out. The second line of the application, odds are you're not going to get that apartment or get that job. So this housing first approach recognizes that. It also recognizes that there's a spectrum. Some people need and can take rental assistance, and you can get them into an apartment and they just fly. Some people need immediate care. They need a shelter, a transitional home, or a navigation center. Ultimately, anybody that's in that kind of environment, you want to pull them through that. You don't want them to stay in that environment. You want to pull them through that into a home. So you have rapid rehousing for some people. For other people, you have permanent housing, permanent supportive housing. There are some people in our community that, quite frankly, are going to need our help for an indefinite period of time. But they are better and safer, and our community is better and safer if they're in a home, in a safe place, than if they're in the woods somewhere. The studies indicate that those folks, if they have substance dependence, use less. They end up in jail less. They end up in our EMS vehicles less. They end up in our court system less. So it's recognizing that there are services and different people. There are so many different reasons why someone's experiencing homelessness. But in almost every instance, the common factor is if we can just get them into a home, then we have a chance of winning.
So Bill, when you think about that housing spectrum, right? You and I had a great conversation about this in terms of the housing spectrum. You believe that we're missing some of that housing in the middle, that sort of intermediate housing. Tell the audience more about that, because I think that's a great point in terms of as we think about the spectrum of thinking about housing along that spectrum piece. Please.
So the mayor touched on this briefly in his comments, but it's important to recognize that while housing first is a national known best practice, actually beyond the United States, HUD would tell you, for example, that should only be used for your chronically homeless, worst case clients, for example, people that are experiencing multiple co-occurring disorders, long periods of time on the street. To the mayor's point, other people need a soft touch, a light touch to rebound quickly. I think that what we've been missing in the community is first, we've had most of our focus and attention on housing first. We've got to provide a housing first unit for everyone. I think what's been missing is in the meantime, if we can't get someone in that unit quickly, they're languishing on the street because we have not had adequate amount of shelter or shelter where people frankly want to go. The answer when an APD says you can't be here to the question where can I go is go to Arch. You see it every day, as do we. That's not a place where a lot of people want to be, at least for good reason in many cases. And that's not to say, by the way, that Front Steps, which manages the Austin Resource Center for the Homeless, isn't doing a lot of great work. Last year, they housed over 460 people. Not all of them came through the Austin Resource Center for the Homeless. So my point, though, is we've got to be able to solve for that immediate question. Where can we take people? If you were to hear from the Homeless Outreach Street Team, which we helped to create, the interdisciplinary team with integral care caseworkers, EMS, and APE working together to proactively interact with people on the street experiencing homelessness to hopefully get in front of that 911 call or the catastrophe from happening out on the street. The number one thing they're going to say is, we don't have a place to take people.
Sure.
So to provide for that place where shelter should only be short term, you should not be in there for a very long period of time. What's that middle piece? If somebody needs a place to be for 2 nights, 2 weeks, or 2 years, or permanently, then how do we cover the full spectrum and not just focus on one piece of it, which I believe has largely been our focus for a long time.
So Matt, just sort of bridging off of the point that Bill's making, one of the things that struck me when you and I had our conversation together was the point that you made about Austin's chronic homeless population. That when we look at our homeless population here in Austin, we have a higher share of folks who are chronically homeless for lots of different reasons, refusing to take shelter, experiencing extreme challenges. What can be done for them?
Yeah, so, in Austin here, there's approximately 54% of the folks experiencing homelessness are what is to be termed as chronically homeless. So they have longer lengths of time in homelessness, and they have a disabling condition, to co-occur with their length of time homeless. And I think what that says a little bit about our system. What's really important about Housing First too, which I want to mention, is it's really about providing the right type of resource at the right time to that person's time and getting them engaged in that resource. So, what we're not trying to do here, what we shouldn't be trying to do is institutionalize homelessness, create programs that people have to fit into in order to get housing and maintain housing. Really what we need is an approach that the people that are experiencing homelessness can dictate their need to us and we can support them in that need. And that's really what Housing First is. And whether they need our support for 2 months, 2 years, or the rest of their lives, that's a different a different set of people, but it gets to the root of the problem. And the problem is, the current problem right now that people experiencing homelessness have is we don't have the right type of resource to offer them, to engage them, to get inside, to start to get well, and start to engage in the resources that we have. I mean, I think, at our last point in time count here in Austin, we had 62% of the people experiencing homelessness in Austin had duly diagnosed or co-occurring issues with their disability. That's a really high number of folks on the street that need support beyond just a home to live in. They need support services, whether they be case management services, clinical case management services, peer support services, and they need an environment by which they can access those services in a very low barrier way. We need to be able to provide housing to folks that they don't have 10 selection criteria that says if you have a felony in the last 10 years, you can't live here. That sort of thing is going to perpetuate our homelessness situation here in Austin.
So let me ask you this, is there a city across the country that is doing this somewhat right, that we can say, look, that's a great best practice, let's look to them? You had mentioned San Francisco.
Sure.
On this issue.
Well, I think what's important to recognize is that cities that do have a great homeless response system, they might have large numbers of people experiencing homelessness in their area. What they do is they provide the dollars they can, the resources they can that are outside of typical funding streams, HUD, and whether it's very specific, people have to fit into very specific types of programs. San Francisco has committed $250 million annually to homelessness in their budget. They have problems related to homelessness that are affordability issues and a growing homeless population that can't afford to live in their city. And Austin is in a position now where it's a large city with a relatively low homeless population compared to other cities of that size, and it's a really good time right now to address homelessness in a very impactful way, put the resources into the system, and to really listen to the people experiencing homelessness about what they need and try to provide that.
Sure. So Sherry, you're the public finance expert on the panel. How do we pay for all this? Are there interesting practices or places that we can look to in terms of best practices? Again, how can the city really afford to do some of these things that have been suggested?
Yeah, you read my mind. It is going to take all of us. This is a complicated puzzle, and we all have to play our part as far as the pieces. And so that means that this is going to take dollars from the city. The city has general obligation bonds for housing, and some of that is for permanent supportive housing. It's going to take sources that we can get, whether it's state or federal, but also nonprofits, which we see here, and also the private sector. So an example, the Rathgaber Center that has been constructed for families experiencing homelessness is not open because there isn't the money for operating that. And so that's something to keep in mind, that this is, when we talk about funding, it's not just building the facility, you have to build into the cost of that operating the facility. And so I think that we need to look for more partners who can also help with operating, because we talked about we need a variety of housing, and it's true. Whether it is permanent supportive housing, whether it's something where somebody can get on their feet and a month be back in a job, or whether it's something where someone has a medical condition that could be chronic and permanent or temporary for a few weeks. And so we have to look at funding from all of these areas and combine them.
So Bill, go ahead, add to that.
Thank you. I just want to tag on to a point that Sherry just made, and that is how we most efficiently use our resources.
Sure.
And so the fact that we have the Rathgaber Women, Children's and Family Center constructed, virtually ready to open, but we are trying to fill a $500,000 gap in funding, which, by the way, Downtown Austin Alliance has stepped up to contribute toward that. Dick Rathgaber is challenging the community to come up with another $300,000. He'll contribute $100,000 of his own. That's doable. The point there is, however, we've got about 80 beds a night roughly at the downtown Salvation Army shelter, right across the alley from Arch, and right across the street or the alley from all of the mess that we see in that area every day and every night. That's the worst possible environment for kids and families that there could possibly be. In terms of efficient use of resources, by getting the women and children out of that downtown shelter and basically draining Salvation Army's wait list, we can repurpose those beds and they can be configured differently where we may make sort of 100 single men and single women and more effectively use our resources and immediately add capacity to the system. But as we've been saying here, we've got to move people through the shelter, not have that as a place where they stay for long periods of time. So we've still got to build capacity in other places.
And I would add that we have to do a better job of coordinating those services and those wraparound services, and that those people who do have the opportunity to get stabilized and move into housing, we need this new model,
Yeah.
where they're not just cycling in and out of shelters.
And we're going to talk about shared services, wraparound
Sure.
services in just a second.
I just want
Yeah,
to,
man.
I just want to thank the DA for doing that, for stepping forward on that, and the Salvation Army for that facility. And I just want to point out to everybody, the budget that the city council is approving now, we've also put in money, so the community generally through the city is also participating in standing on that.
So I want to just move the conversation to keep us on time. So one of the, Mr. Mayor, the city council recently stated that the city's going to explore a homeless shelter in each of our city council districts. What are the site selection criteria for those shelters? How can we standardize that approach, and how do we engage the public better around this process?
I think those are all issues that we're looking at. And I think that as we recognize, as we open up this conversation, I think it begins with the recognition that we're all in this. You know, it was, this isn't a new conversation.
Yeah, for sure.
You know, 2 years ago, I was at a town hall meeting in Onion Creek. And the folks in Onion Creek used to go and talk about flooding and land use planning, and really all that they wanted to talk about was the homeless encampment that was at the overpass on I-35 at Slaughter Lane. And virtually everyone there was saying, what can we do? Do something about this. And it's frustrating from where we sit to talk about what we can do in that area, because we could put a fence around that and stop everybody from sleeping under the overpass in Slaughter, except that they would show up at the overpass at Bedway Boulevard in Manchac, where I have also walked, as have my colleagues on the council, with folks that say, do something about this, this is in our neighborhood, do something about this. These are people, they don't disappear, so if we stop them from being in one place, they will be somewhere else. Sure. And as a community, we have to stop spending millions and millions of taxpayers' dollars chasing people around. So we recognize. So I think that we're getting into that issue right now on site selection.
So it sounds like that's something the council's committed to, just not to put you on the spot, but that's something the council's committed to doing is working through a process that allows us to understand how those shelters are sited.
Absolutely, and we know that one of the models in this community right now that so many people love, community first, that a lot of people support. It took them 5 years to find their site. 5 years. So we're going to have to come up with site criteria that will actually enable us to locate opportunities. But I will say that it's important when we do locate them, and a part of the responsibility, I think, and the obligation that we have as a council and as a city, is to make sure that when we locate these, we make sure that they are additions to areas that they go into and not detractors, which means we can't create anything that is laden with the obligations that the area around the arch has. We can't repeat that experience anywhere in our city, because wherever we do it, it has to work so well that we have as a community the opportunity to do a second, a third, and a fourth.
So Chief, just building off of that, as we think about the locations for site selection for these shelters, how important is public safety? How does that figure into this discussion?
Public safety is critical. It's critical for both the people that are using the shelter, but it's also for the communities, the neighborhoods that we're putting them in. And I think that's why the discussion is going to include the restrictions such as you cannot sit, camp, lie at these. They're not meant to be drop-in facilities where people would stand in lines and wait for services. They have to be set up in a way that it is for the clientele that are utilizing the services there, and it's not a place where people congregate or hang out, and that if it becomes that we have sanctions and enforcement options to make sure that we can put a stop.
So with that, there may be place design issues or even camping bans or something like that we may want to consider around some of these shelters.
if you're asking my opinion, yes, I think that if we're going to have expectations that we're not going to allow that conduct to take place, we have to have consequences if they do take place.
Sure. So now I'm going to go to this question about public health, and I'm pushing us fast through this because I want to get to your questions. So Matt, tell us a little bit about the health challenges that our homeless population is experiencing. And I ask that question because there's lots of myths around the questions of health, particularly that folks are experiencing. Can you give us a really quick sort of short summary of some of those issues?
Well, I mean, I think you start with the statistic that if you're spending any time homeless, your life expectancy is 26 years shorter than someone who's not homeless. I mean, I think that in itself speaks volumes to the toll that experiencing homelessness takes on someone's body. I mean, I think access to quality, affordable health care and housing are human rights and should be treated as such. And our focus as a community, a lot of times, is just let's get more bricks and mortar out there. I think and that's important, and we're going to need to do that. We're also needing to help, we're going to have to get people services and care in their homes so that they stay well and that they're not costing. One of the things we talked about is costs associated with healthcare services, uncompensated costs to hospital systems, and jails, criminal justice systems. That housing and appropriate supportive services can help mitigate. And not only, we can sit here and have a cost discussion, but it's just the right thing to do. This is our community. These are human beings. These are people that deserve the right to have a home.
So Susan, you all have had terrific success with youth homelessness in our city. What have you all learned that are lessons learned in this space about ensuring, effective service delivery? If you had to say, here are the 3 things that we learned that we can apply to this, and I don't mean to put a number on it,
For sure.
but what are those things that we've learned?
I think the planning and coordination amongst partners, both institutional partners, public partners, and nonprofit partners, it is a deep, intentional, structured collaboration around the data involved, around sharing data around who's experiencing homelessness, what their needs are, what the best, who is best suited to house them, what housing is going to be most effective, because we do need a menu of housing options for people's needs, and who can provide the best, most comprehensive wraparound to meet the needs of the youth. So I think that coordination, the focus on the data, and also the focus on, and I think this is one thing we have done exceptionally well and are still learning with youth homelessness, having youth who've experienced homelessness have a powerful voice at the table to design the system, to approve the services, to have a voice in how funding happens, and to keep the service providers accountable for meeting their needs.
So Chris, you've been an advocate for mental health first responders. Tell us why Austin needs that program.
Sure. Well, I think that in general, when we look at a lot of societal ills, whether they're behavioral health, mental health, related to poverty, we've answered those problems with police and prisons. And not only is that not improving our public safety, it comes at extreme costs, both for our whole community, as well as for obviously the people that we're arresting in jail. And so, a big part of the work that I do is to try to understand where we can meet the needs of our community, some of which do impact public safety, but do that with alternative responses. And so with mental health first response, it's a recognition that we have a lot of folks in our community that have mental health challenges, both housed and unhoused, and that police are not always the best response. In fact, people that are mental health professionals that have years and years of training are best equipped to respond to those calls and to de-escalate situations and ultimately to divert people from both hospitals and from jails and improve outcomes for the community, for those folks, and really for everyone.
And Dallas has a program like this, right? And Dallas is piloting a program like this. Tell us about that program and the successes that program has seen.
Sure, yeah. So the Meadows Foundation, which recently released a report here about mental health first response, is pioneered a project here called Right Care. It started in 2018, and the reports that they've come back with after about a year of service was that they were diverting about a third of folks that would have gone to prisons or jail or hospitals are now being diverted and being into care that they need, which again is better for the whole community as well as much, much better for the individuals being impacted.
So Chief, what do you think?
I think that talking specifically about the Meadows program and the Dallas model, actually, Mayor and Council got a report today from the Meadows that as much as it's a great model for Dallas and as much as she would like to implement it in Austin because it was her creation, that that's not the right program for Austin, but that instead what we're doing right now with all the providers is working, and that we're working on the improvements now of what can differential response look like. We're training dispatchers in mental health. We're working on getting mental health clinicians in the dispatch center so they can take that call and actually respond to that person in crisis and maybe either get more information from the responding officer or maybe determine, in probably the rarest, but if we can build upon this, those circumstances where maybe an officer is not needed because we can establish via that phone conversation that there's not a concern for someone's safety. So I think a lot of good information came out of the Meadows report, and again, we just got the report of Mayor and Council today, and I look forward to the continued work, but we've already taken some of those steps. And then I think, as was widely reported earlier this week, we're taking the step at the Austin Police Department of training every single officer with the additional 40 hours of mental health training that we think will benefit them when they respond to these things.
So we've got about 10 minutes before we move into audience questions, and so I just want to go to some thoughts about immediate action. As we all know, the Austin American Statesman recently ran an editorial calling for immediate action. Mayor Adler, you've expressed some changes, some thoughts on some changes to the ordinance because of public safety. Can you tell us about those suggestions that you have?
It's not just me, I work together with some of my colleagues, we posted something that's publicly available. Councilmember Kitchen and Toho and Councilmember Passar participated in conversations. I think there are several things we need to do. First is to reaffirm that no one wants to see camping all over the city. We should start it off. The question is, how do you get from here to there? I think that there's kind of a social compact, an agreement that we make with ourselves as a community, that we realize that the more places we have for people to be able to be, the less of a need there's going to be for people to be camping in the city. So I think that the first thing we need to do is we really need to more aggressively provide places for people to be. Some of it is the immediate sheltering, so it's the kind of emergency kind of situation that you were talking about. Some of it's the light touch kind of work. We already know what works. We were able to reach effective zero for veterans homelessness. We house over 650 veterans. Every veteran that we find in our city now experiencing homelessness, we can get into a home in short order and wraparound services right away. We were able to get half of the children on our streets that were homeless off our streets last year. So we know it works, but we have to scale them up. So I would hope that in the immediate future, we're finding additional opportunities. Maybe it's finding a hotel that we can convert. Maybe it's finding additional spaces for people. Maybe it's things like the Math Tabor Center. I don't know, immediate spaces. Beyond that, I think we also have to start identifying places where we don't want people camping and sitting in line because they're not the best and safest places for people to be. The manager, I think, is going to issue, he said he's going to issue a memo tomorrow that begins to identify some of those places. The work that the council members posted on the board starts talking about areas proximate to the traffic or highly pedestrian traffic areas, flood prone areas. So we can start identifying places where people should not be. I see us doing those two things in the immediate short term.
So Bill, you said one of the things, and when I posed that question to you,